So, I'm writing this as a form of confession. Not because I've done anything wrong, but because I'm going to stand by and do nothing. I guess my story starts way back when I was about 6 or 7. I was out playing in the backyard with my ball, just huffing it about, when it went flying into the neighbors. The fence between the two houses was very tall to a 7-year-old, and the only gap in it was next to a great big tree growing in the middle of the boundary fence. The fence had been erected on either side, as whoever originally built the houses had obviously decided the tree was too nice to cut down. So, in my determined 7-year-old way, I slithered in between the tree and the fence, nearly getting stuck and catching my leg on a nail on the way. I popped through with one final effort, and was just about to inspect my wounds when a voice from under the tree said, "You're bleeding." On further inspection, there sat a girl roughly my age. This didn't come as any great surprise because I already knew about Ruby. I'd heard my mother discussing our neighbors with her friends. Apparently, her dad was a drinker, and her mother had run off when she was tiny. Sometimes we'd hear him yelling at Ruby when their windows were open. Mom would just tut and shake her head and say, "Poor little mite." No one ever thought to step in, though. That was just how it was. "Come in the house and wash that cut," she said as I followed her meekly. While our houses must have been the same when they were first built, hers was dilapidated and scruffy, whereas mine was bright and gleaming. She was just mopping up the blood from my leg when the front door banged. She went white and froze, and before either of us had time to think, her father came storming into the kitchen. Without a word, he slapped her across the face, sending her flying across the room. "Get out of my house," he growled at me. And I fled, back through the yard and through the fence as fast as my legs could carry me. That night, the yelling in their house was worse. I lay in bed and covered my ears with my pillow. The next day, I felt I had to find out how she was. I slithered through the fence, more carefully this time, and sat under the big tree and waited for her. And in due time, she came out of the house. She was looking pale, but seemed happy to see me. I didn't want to get her into trouble, but she explained that morning she'd had a good long talk with her dad, and he'd agreed to stop drinking. She told me the tree was a magic tree, and if you sat under it and wished hard enough, the things you wished for came true. She'd wished that her dad would stop hitting her, and now he wasn't going to anymore. What more did I need as evidence? Plus, she was a whole 6 months older than me, as it turned out, so I was slightly in awe of her wisdom. This became a pattern for us. After school, we'd sit under the wishing tree and play stupid games, or as we got older, we'd talk. Sometimes she'd put her head on my shoulder while I told her all about my day. And other times we'd share the headphones on my MP3 player and listen to music. She always asked for a Ruby by the Kaiser Chiefs. She playfully told me that they'd written it for her. I can only remember having one argument, and that was over my 13th birthday party. When I invited her, she promised to come, but she never appeared. I even braved knocking on the door. My mom would have killed me if I slithered through the fence in my best party clothes. But her dad said she wasn't home. After the party, I got changed and slithered through the fence, and there she was sitting under the tree. I was hurt and said as much. What kind of friend was she anyway to blow me off that way? "Look at me, Jack. I mean, really look at me," she said. "I don't belong with your friends." And I did look at her. Long, wild, dark hair tumbling down her back, the dark smudges that were her eyes, the clean but washed-out dress that was obviously meant for a 10-year-old, as it barely covered her butt. "I don't have party clothes, and I couldn't bring you a present. I'm sorry." In that moment, my heart thunked in my chest, and I fell in love as deeply as any 13-year-old can. "One day, I'll take you away from this, I promise." She sat under the wishing tree and said she wished I would. The last conversation I had with Ruby was, again, sitting under the wishing tree. I was headed off for university. I asked her why she didn't leave too, but she said she had to stick around. "I have to be here to remind my dad what a monster he is when he drinks," she said. But one day, I'm gonna be free and leave this place. I haven't forgotten what you promised. Neither had I, but the heart can be fickle, especially when it's living out of your pants. And during my time at uni, I met a girl called Emma. Just before I graduated, we found out that Emma was pregnant. Not really a part of my life plan, but I was happy enough. We moved back to my folks and I got a job at my dad's factory, and we married. The house next door was dilapidated, and apparently Ruby's dad had died and she had gone. During the next 6 months, I bought the house off my folks, and they downsized into something smaller as neither of them were getting any younger, they said. Then things started to get a little weird. To begin with, Emma and I weren't getting on very well. Marry in haste, repent at leisure, as they say. Then one night last summer, we were sitting in the garden. My folks had put a garden swing under the wishing tree. It was no longer a thing of beauty, it was gnarled and dead. We were sitting there having one of those conversations where it turned out that everything wrong in Emma's life was my fault. When during a break in the conversation, she suddenly put her head on my shoulder and started humming Ruby. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and I just about leapt out of the seat. "Oh God, you're giving me one of my headaches," she snapped and stomped back into the house. I thought about that a lot over the next few months. My Ruby and how much I missed her. What had happened to her? So yesterday things came to a head. Or in the winter, the wishing tree had become unstable. It was dead, and during a high wind, a huge branch came smashing into the yard. I'd hired someone to come take it down. It was still relatively early in the morning when I got a call at work from the police. A body had been found buried under the wishing tree. The body of a 7-year-old girl. My Ruby. I flew home. It couldn't be her. I'd known her until she was much older than that. When I got home, my folks were at mine. The police had called them too, as they were neighbors at the time of the incident. Even my parents remembered that night. The argument after her dad had found me in the house. The screaming of a small child. They also remembered they hadn't seen her since. They had informed the authorities at the time, something I knew nothing about, but her father had said her mother had taken her away and no one could prove otherwise. I thought about her telling me he couldn't hit her anymore, and that long conversation they'd had the next morning. She stayed to keep him off the drink. I guess if anything would, it'd be the nagging ghost of the child you murdered. Now that her body had been found, I wonder if Ruby was finally free. So back to my confession. Emma had been away for a few days with our little boy, visiting her parents. She said she needed some space, and when she first arrived back this morning, her intention was to pack their stuff and leave me. In the space of a couple hours, I've seen a huge change in her. She's usually such a control freak, not a hair out of place. But she's in the other room now, scouring the internet for holiday destinations. Within a half hour of being back, she snuggled next to me, put her head on my shoulder, and asked if we could finally go away like I'd promised. Her hair is tumbling down her back, and she has the Kaiser Chiefs blasting Ruby on the stereo. So what am I gonna do about it? Nothing. I'm going to take my wife to see the world like I promised her when she was 13.